capitalism, patriarchy, and racism work seamlessly together to help those who are already in power maintain the status quo. They need to keep the public distracted while they continuously grow in wealth and power. If you don't want to be manipulated and make decisions that self-sabotage you in the long term, you have to understand that these decisions oftentimes make you feel so good. The best systemic oppression is when people feel hopeful with the potential idea that there's something out there that's available for them that's going to meet their ongoing pains and emotional needs. There are many different strategies that works, and if you really want to know how you're being controlled, you have to pay attention to the media and entertainment as your first stop. Today we're going to do a deep dive focus on K-drama and how it helps to maintain patriarchal privilege while subjecting women in a self-sabotaging and vulnerable condition. Now, this is not just Korean women, this is global. One day, I would like to go into more details about how I went through my journey of going from the good girl to the bad bitch, as I am Korean and come from a very patriarchal and traditional family. Two aspects that have become an integral part of my journey is that number one, I left the country when I was 5 years old. And part of why I have the type of perspective that I have is because I was exposed to two different types of colonial societies. My first immigration experience was to Buenos Aires, Argentina. The second to Vancouver, Canada. So now we have the Spanish colonization, and then now we have the British side of the colonization too. In a nutshell, that's been my experience. In addition, I went for 17 years of disconnecting from my Korean side of the family for various reasons. During this process, it gave me a lot of time to figure out my own thoughts and learn to think for myself, while I figured out my own life and my pathway without depending on my family, because a dependency is like a crutch, and without needing validation from them. Due to these conditions I just described, I was able to get a different perspective than perhaps many of the Korean women who also lived through the same experiences of being born into misogyny and living in a very patriarchal family. Regardless of whether you're being raised in the West or not, when your family has that deep background in misogyny and patriarchy, where you as a woman, you're not valuable, you're never going to measure up to be good enough, and anything that you do is going to be evaluated under scrutiny and criticism, while your male counterparts get so much validation and tolerance for mediocrity. Your self-identity then shapes to make you believe that you are never enough, and then you spend your whole life coping against the feeling of not enoughness and fears, to the point that you don't even know who you are. We can arguably say that K-drama was created to entertain people and to make people feel distracted and hopeful in a world where idealism is far from the reality. Usually K-dramas are full of romantic plots where there's unconditional love from a stranger, typically a male lead, and the female lead does everything that a woman is supposed to do. She embodies all the aspects of quote-unquote femininity. She wins him over. Also, there are oftentimes a lot of tragedy where the good woman is either sacrificed, or sometimes there are happy endings where she gets what she wants from a patriarchal sense. The prize for her isn't anything more than to win a man's love who will do anything for her. Now, why are these storylines so typical? Before K-dramas became a global sensation, we're talking late 80s and early 90s, my family, my dad was already getting access to them. Even though we're living in Buenos Aires, which was considered a place that was really far away, that most Koreans didn't even know where that was, there were Korean convenience stores, like you go to like H-Mart now, very similar, owned by families. And what they also had is that they had VHS of these K-dramas that they will bring from Korea. And like we used to go to Blockbuster and these video rental places, you could go there, you could buy your Korean food and also rent these VHS tapes, which sometimes it was really inconvenient because let's say that there's like a 8 video part series and there's like series 5 is not available. then you have to go back another time to rent that one, and you have to wait until somebody else brings that one back. Sometimes people don't bring it back because they end up keeping it or whatever, or they lose it, and that was how the condition was. But regardless, I watched a lot of K-drama when I was growing up. Part of it was that my dad was very adamant that both my brother and I become fluent in Korean, also read and write. So we had a lot of Korean books. I read a lot of history books in Korean, for example, when I was growing up, and also world literature. And every day, in addition to schoolwork, and my school will start at like 8 a.m. and finish at 5 p.m. because we went to a private school and it was such a long day. We still had to come home and do our Korean assignments. So I had a very intense childhood where there was a lot of academics, but the K-dramas were always an essential part of family bonding and evening activity. Eventually, when we came to Vancouver, same pattern. We were watching a lot of K-drama. This was 94 when we arrived here. Same idea, you go to a Korean store where they have food, and then you also can buy groceries and rent those videos. Around the time I turned 14, 15 years old, I decided to stop watching them, and this started to bother my dad a lot. Around this time, I started to have a lot of conflict with him. Most of the conflict had to do with abiding to gender roles, so he was really trying hard to make me fit into this box of what a daughter should be, what a woman should be, and oftentimes, and actually this conversation started from when I was maybe, as long as I can remember, 5, 6, 7 years old. It was always what's appropriate and what's elegant for a girl to be, a woman. And then as I start to get older, around 8, 9, 10 years old, and of course during teen years, it was always about being fit for a husband. And one of the arguments that he always had is that if I continued to be the way I was, I would never end up married. And even if I did end up married, I would end up getting a divorce because the husband wouldn't be able to stand somebody like me. The main conflict I had with my dad was my personality, and at the time I didn't realize how strategic it was, but he used to try to get me to watch K-dramas. Like, you don't really see parents trying to get their kids to watch TV, but my dad kept offering me to watch K-dramas. And then because he was offering, and it's really odd because it's very normal for parents to want to take away TV time from you, but he was giving it to me. I didn't quite understand why, but I resisted. I had some inkling back then that there was something about these series that was really not matching the reality that I was witnessing. That I was very clear, and I was too transparent, and I would have these discussions with my dad, which any discussion or disagreement or not abiding to whatever is the default condition is considered as argumentative and difficult. So from his perspective, I was a very difficult daughter, even though I did my best to be good. There's so much goodness I had to undo, but even then, there was this very strong sense of rebellion, which he could really sense I was going to be a huge problem later. And one of the ways that he tried to control me and tried to get, he called so-called the Western feminism out of me. He didn't use those terms, but he would call it the other way of being, or the Western way of being. And he will always say, no matter what, you're still a Korean person. He would say to both my brother and I, but when it came to me specifically, outside of the typical confusion, filial piety, and that sort of brainwashing, I said it's brainwashing, because it's trying to get you to abide into a type of unconditional service without evaluating who the person is and what it actually means to follow through. And of course, many people will say it's because I grew up in such an individualistic type of educational environment that I may have these different opinions. And, that may be true. But how K-drama served, and I could see how this impacts people from an outside point of view, especially because I resisted so hard from watching it. I told my dad I lost interest. It's not close to reality. And I saw that really bothered him. The only reason why I could do that is because I had perspective. If you don't see there's something else out there, and you see that in your environment everyone's doing the same thing, you don't question these things. Also, my dad gave us access to world literature, which I guess he didn't see it coming, but I was reading a lot of stuff that In addition to that, I was already dealing with a lot of the aspects of not just patriarchy, but the R, racism of CPR. So within all of those contexts, I gained perspective that perhaps I wouldn't have gained if I had just stayed in Korea, or if I had just immigrated to one place, like come directly to Canada, for example. When there's a systemic gaslighting to make you believe in a hope that doesn't exist, it usually is a direct cover of the biggest problem that the society is experiencing. And patriarchal oppression and gender inequality is one of the biggest problems that Korea has. Some people may disagree. Some people may say that the relationship with North Korea is the most pressing issue. I'm not disregarding the problems are also coexisting at the same time. But it isn't normal in a society for men of all ages and backgrounds to create AI pornography of the women that they go to school with, their family members, and put them in a chat room. If there wasn't a strong case of misogyny, patriarchal entitlement, mediocre men who have gotten their way because of the lack of parenting and accountability that has now gone out of hand for generations and generations, such symptoms do not suddenly appear as a horrible embarrassment and painful criminal activity that affects so many specific group of women. This is a hate crime towards women, and there are hate crimes towards women happening every single day. So what is the best way for a society that has a strong problem like this to try to mitigate it, at the same time make a shit ton of money? Capitalism, patriarchy, and racism, they all work together to make money. So in a homogenous country like South Korea, you don't have the type of racism that we are familiar with in other colonized cultures. But what there is a lot of is classism. Classism is huge. And there is patriarchy. When we say patriarchy, we're also talking about beauty standards are extremely strict, gender roles and sexuality where cis and straight is the only way to be, which erases the experiences of any diversity and human needs that arise from that. So why not gaslight your whole society that there's no such problem, so it minimizes the pain, because all people have to do is tune into the TV after their painful day is somewhat over, whether they were going to school or they were dealing with their family as a housewife, or they were dealing with very difficult corporate culture. Just get on the TV and watch idealism. Watch different emotional manipulation drama that makes you feel like there's hope left, where classism is challenged because there's gonna be a love story or friendships that are defying classism. And unconditional love is such a persistent theme because nobody in this world, including Korea, experiences unconditional love, even from their own parents. So putting that theme there also generates a lot of hope and soothing the really painful wound that people collectively carry. And then the next step is to export all of this first to other Asian countries that are experiencing a lot of pain from oppression and not enoughness, because in Asia there's a clear hierarchy. There's a lot of racism as soon as you step out of that one country. Now we're not talking about homogeneous country, but now we're looking at Asia as a whole, especially going to Southeast Asia, and a lot of racism that Southeast Asians get from South Koreans. The oppressed have to pay for it. The fantasy that these type of men exist where they can make all their dreams come true. So again, you're seeing a completely opposite picture of what actually goes on, but it validates the feeling of what people want it to be. The fantasy that people could hope and wish for. There's a heaven and a paradise existing in these storylines. And mind you, I enjoy many of the K-dramas. I think people are very talented. The actors are very talented. The screenwriters, extremely talented. It's not an issue with talent. I'm also not attacking the whole industry. I'm only addressing how it is used and how it impacts people's perception and how it hides the actual problem from needing to solve. It kites people over with hope to not have to think about the issues that are constantly harming them and also costing them to continuously have this illusion. I enjoy quite a lot of period pieces, to be honest. I really love how they're done. The production's exciting, interesting, the costumes, the acting. I mean, it is perfection. I love period pieces because I love the history and I love how they integrate history. I love the creative screenwriting. I really enjoy many aspects of it. I also love the historical accuracy, and Koreans are very picky. If the costume or the hairstyles or historical facts are not lining up, you're gonna hear about it. People are not kind about this. So there has to be this utmost care and a lot of perfection that goes into planning these series. That's why historical dramas are often my favorite, and I watched a lot of them when I was younger. Recently, the latest one I watched is Mr. Sunshine, which was extremely well done. But again, beyond the history, which is the part I enjoyed the most, the part that I didn't enjoy very much is the love part, which goes to the point. Most people watch it for the love part. People don't understand how this emotional manipulation is actually not serving them, because in the moment you feel alive, you feel like there's hope, you feel something, because the society that you live in actually makes you feel quite dead and hopeless. So then it's giving you like a feeling of being alive. The more you consume something, your mindset becomes calibrated to match what you consume. Just like we become what we eat, we become what we consume. So the more you consume with this hopefulness, the less effective, the less discerning, and the more likeliness that you're gonna make really harmful mistakes, because you're gonna mistake the fantasy with reality. You're gonna misinterpret what happens in your life with fantasy. An example of this are these Korea boo girls, these Western girls that go to Korea, and I'm sure they're not just white women who do this. There are other women who do this from other parts of the world. They go to Korea thinking that they're gonna find this kind of Korean man. They have this fantasy and even fetish. Then I start to see a lot of TikTok, which really shocked me, that these women were so surprised that many of them were discovering that they were assaulted. Like they're discovering, they didn't expect it, they didn't see it coming, by the same Korean men that they thought they were gonna give them unconditional love and romance and so much care that the men from their culture were never gonna give them. As a woman who grew up with a lot of oppas in my life, and I remember when this oppa phenomenon became a real thing, it was in the early 90s. It was at a time when my family, my dad was getting a lot of these K-dramas, and then we started to hear the terminology oppa being used to boyfriends and a man with romantic interest from a woman's perspective. That word oppa means a younger sister using it to an older brother. So I have a lot of oppas. I have my biological oppa, and then I have cousins. So all your cousins, also you call them either older brother, older sister, whatever, younger brother, younger sister. There's all terminologies for that, and the terminology is very genderized. So oppa is a term that you use from a younger sister to an older brother, whether that's your real brother or cousin, or even sort of a friend or whatever. That terminology, it sounds very incestuous and messed up when you're an immigrant and you're removed from popular culture and you suddenly start hearing it in that context. And I've never liked it. I would never use it myself. Mind you, I've had different crushes to different Korean men when I was younger, and I never wanted to use a terminology. I want to call that person by their name or some other terminology, definitely not. It's just weird when you're like a time capsule when you immigrate, because you are not there during the transition, and it's a stark cold water, like an ice bucket challenge kind of thing, where you suddenly wake up and then you hear this thing and it's like so messed up. This is so incestuous sounding. People are so desensitized and normalized to it. Maybe people think this is like an exaggeration. But all of this is to build this kind of familiarity. Because what does the oppa do in a family is that person's supposed to provide protection for you. The terminology already creates a sense of connection and belonging with a person who's a stranger. So while all of this mess is going on, where women become brainwashed by fantasy and start making bad decisions in their reality, not that. Now let's look at K-drama from a global context of how it benefits CPR in every way. First of all, C, capitalism. The more familiarity that the global market and people have with Korea in a positive way, in a very hopeful, beautiful, unconditional love kind of way that incites so many positive, warm feelings within, then people are more likely to be open to tourism, and that has worked very effectively. Korea has gained a lot of brownie points in global tourism, or desire for people to go there and learn about the culture and travel, learn the language, etc. I remember going to Korea when I was young. There were no foreigners. Now when you go there, there's so many foreigners, and I noticed quite a lot of foreigners when I went there in 2018, and then recently when I went there last year, so many more. So there's that allows the whole economy, the South Korean economy, whatever they're selling, to enter into the foreign market in a very natural, non-salesy way. I have clear memories of having Korean things when I was young, and it was not received very well by my peers who were either Argentinian or Canadian, because they didn't have familiarity with Korea. It was a strange place, it's far away, and a lot of times when in the 80s, especially in the early 90s, people didn't even know where South Korea was in the map. So when I would tell them that, they assume I'm Chinese or Japanese, and I tell them I'm South Korean, they didn't know where that was. So the possibility in that condition for people to buy anything that is Samsung, Hyundai, or Kia is impossible. You can see that. So when you bypass the doubt through creating these warm and fuzzy feelings and a lot of repetition, familiarity, and K-pop does the same thing, by the way, then it opens up the consumer's mindset to want to and to be open to using these products. The products are very, very good. That's not the issue. It's overcoming the racism part that does very effectively by using these commercialized K-dramas and K-pop too. That has been very progressive in the last 20 years from my observation. And the Korean skincare too, all of that is selling so much better because of the media. People's consumption of K-dramas and K-pop is what's increased the K-beauty sale too, because K-beauty was always good. I used K-beauty in the 80s and 90s, primarily because there was nothing else that was available, and you get what you get from your family. I also had no idea that K-beauty was that good when I was using it. I had no clue, because Korea, because of the Japanese colonization, had a long history of having inferiority complex, and perhaps not really knowing the way Japan does it really well, market their stuff like is the best in the world. Korea's gotten so much better with that, and I believe it's because of the impact that it's had through the rise of K-drama and K-pop. So there's a lot of positive with that as well. The second layer of impact is the P of patriarchy. Women are globally suffering from patriarchal pains, and women are globally wanting a man who will see them as an equal or see them as precious and valuable. Women globally are dismissed and devalued by their family and have a hard time with a spouse who will even see them as an equal human being. So seeing that idealism play out so many times on screen by a certain group of people in a certain culture that is unfamiliar creates a type of ideal and fantasy, and which can also turn into fetishization. But it's a fetish where women, no matter what race you are, and I think a lot of white women don't understand this, men see you as less than no matter what race they are. Your whiteness does not carry you. You look at women who have been in interracial relationship and become very abused by their man of color partner. A lot of these white women don't understand how this could happen to them. It's because patriarchy is much stronger than racial influences, depending on the context, but in majority of the cases, if you look in corporate culture, usually a man of color will be picked as a leader before a white woman. Also, white women being women, you also have a lot of prey mindset type of behaviors and communication habits, whereas men who grew up in an environment where they're the best and their mistakes are tolerated and minimized, they have a lot of superiority complex, and naturally they're going to appear more confident because in their environment they were liked and seen as better than women, and there were people below them from the moment that they were born. So with all of this, it creates a fantasy based on the unmet needs and pain. Then the last layer is racism. It is a very common human way of making decision that when a relationship doesn't work out with somebody from that culture, you over and over, or maybe a couple of times, or you feel like the cultural differences were the problem or something like that, then you move on to a different race or culture. And oftentimes white women who date men of color or aspire to date men of color, those white women had a lot of problems with their white families or with white men. So it also preys on that. It preys on that. And so if you look at all of the CPR aspects, it's a win-win-win, okay? All CPR. Now, if you're a woman of color from a different country, it doesn't matter. It still creates this fantasy because you see the men in your family, the men from your culture, as very flawed and problematic, and then you keep saying this fantasy, so it conditions your mind to believe in a fantasy while you know you're watching TV and this is an illusion that is created through acting and it's a form of exaggeration. We all know that. There's cognitive and then there's emotional. When you have such a dire unmet need, you can't control yourself but to be sold when you see the exact fantasy that you've been hoping and wishing for. So it hits all the CPR points and it's just ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching in every which way. It helps the Korean economy. It positions Korea as a very powerful and covetable nation with and a lot of it is good, okay? And you can enjoy the series and you can enjoy the music. You just have to check yourself that you're not falling into it and becoming a victim. The forces of CPR are very strong. So you have to make sure that you are grounded, that you don't get swept up by it and eaten by the forces, that you become a slave to these forces. That's what I'm addressing here. Not that you shouldn't enjoy it at all, but to be very realistic and objective about where the fantasy is and it ends, and many of the biases and assumptions that come in because you've enjoyed the fantasy so much. All of this was done very intentionally by the Korean government. The K-drama industry and the K-pop industry were the Korean government's investments. It was done intentionally. None of this is an accident. Business is not an accident. When a business or an industry or a type of economy booms, it was done with very, very good strategical planning based on CPR. CPR is the foundation of business. If you meet the flows of CPR, you will be successful. And this is what we learn in our program Be Seen Get Paid, which is a program that you can take after you go through the Unleash program. CPR is how the world works and how people work. If you leverage how people work and how the world naturally works and all the implicit unconscious biases, then even the things that you think is a flaw, for example, Korea being a tiny little nation, not having a ton of resources, was able to fabricate a very lucrative industry out of nothing. That is using CPR to maximum advantage. It's actually so intelligent and so clever. I just see too many people become victimized by this because they're not realizing that this was curated very intentionally and it serves a much greater purpose than just entertainment. I love so many aspects of Korea. There's so much history, there's so many interesting aspects, there's so much wisdom that I learned. And then there's this other side where there are such strong problems that have never gotten resolved and continues to get worse. And the propaganda, and I'm going to talk about other propagandas too for those of you who are feeling offended right now that I focused on this particular issue. Because Hollywood really is the same too. It will pull aspects that are dire societal problems and not only monetize that by giving hope to people, but it's used as a distraction and to give people, it's like a placebo effect of making people feel like this fantasy actually exists in reality, because the more you expose your mind to fantasy, the mind starts to believe it. That's why you have to really curate what you consume. But a lot of people get very addicted to these Korea K-dramas, and the reason is because they're not happy in their own life and they don't feel connection. It targets really the most vulnerable people. Like any system of oppression, the most vulnerable people are the people who are struggling the most. Because when you have a certain sense of privilege, you are able to look down and see that there's a power game happening. If you're not able to even conceptualize that there's a power game happening, that means that you're at the bottom, baby. When you're at the bottom, you just can't conceptualize how something that makes you feel good can harm you. You can't see the impact of how something that everyone else is doing and everyone says is good and is very popular exists to distract you, keep you oppressed, and can be blamed as the culprit of why you make bad decisions. The work that I ended up doing has to do with seeing a lot of contrasts in my life. Also having had a level of privilege in many layers, not just education, but the ability to travel early, the access to certain lifestyle I had since I was young, and knowing that my family comes from a certain privileged background. I'm very transparent with everybody. My grandfather, he had an equivalent of a governor's position. And from what I understand, my family has always been privileged and involved with the government. Then pair that with immigration, which cancels out all of those privileges that you already carry in your body and your blood. But in this complete different society, suddenly you are placed at the bottom. And that's a very stark and shocking, drastically shocking experience. Then, as I mentioned, there's a huge difference between a society that had Spanish colonization versus English colonization, because hierarchies exist within colonizer groups too. So all of this is a very nuanced conversation, but what I can tell you from today's video, if you could just take away one thing, is that anything that just makes you feel like is awesome, is good, is so soft and sugary and makes you happy is a drug. And when you look at anything that is mass produced, that is enjoyed by the masses, if everybody says it's good, you should really question yourself. When you look at businesses around the world, the businesses that are the most financially successful, music, K-dramas, right, skincare, makeup, fashion, just look at anything at all, okay, are addictions. They cater to human addictions, not as a solution, but as a way to keep you hooked, to have temporary results, temporary relief from the pains of CPR, capitalism, patriarchy, racism. This world is unbearable without fantasy and addiction to many people who haven't built their resilience and internal strength. The addictions help those people pull through every single day. Look at alcohol, look at the coffee, and then look at a lot of the wars that we had in the past, like the opium war. It's all based on addiction, because people will do anything to fight for addiction. Look at dating apps and how much love and romance products and services are available out there, because those are all forms of addiction. What is the addiction? In capitalism, connection is not really easily possible. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of resources, which makes it anti-capitalistic and therefore not very viable. And that's why so many of you are traumatized. It's not possible to be not traumatized in a CPR society. You're born and you're going to be traumatized immediately. It's going to happen right away, and you're going to have many layers of trauma. And it's the reason why you don't have community. It's the reason why friendships are difficult, because there's a lot of division, and that's how the society keeps making money and keeps propelling forward. Now, we may think that all of this is very hopeless, but the society has been like this way before you and I existed. What we're really doing here is looking at it objectively, so you're not falling into manipulation and self-sabotaging yourself. Because again, This is not information for the sake of information. It's information to wake you up so you can focus your resources towards what actually matters. You can make good discerning decisions. You can free yourself from these hamster wheels of hope and self-destruction and actually channel your resources to what's going to help you win in this condition. All of that, we talk about it in different topics and different degrees. We cover in our Your Babbage Era community. We cover different topics there. We cover topics on how to deal with relationship, how to deal with the basics, at least the basics of financial literacy. You're not taught these things for a reason. You're not taught boundaries and assertion and how to win for a reason. You're not taught financial literacy to keep you trapped for a reason, because in this society, you need to have people who are oppressed. If we don't have people at the bottom, the society crumbles. You're not taught these things for a reason, not because the education system didn't understand you need this. Everyone knows you need this if they're capable of creating some kind of curriculum for you. So, what is it that you have to do? First of all, a lot of what you're required to do is very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable, and I've been through the process and I still am. A lot of the decisions I make are very odd and weird to regular people. And if I were to one day tell you the story of the things that I had to do to get here, you might just be like, I don't want to do that. Well, I'm not asking you to do that. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I went through 17 years without talking to my family and like engaging or depending or wanting anything from them, right? Because the conditioning was so strong and I knew it was so strong, I had to do something extreme for myself. So you have to be the person that can calibrate your environment, your mindset with objectivity. So all I can teach you is how to be more objective. And then you have to make decisions that are right for you. I can't tell you what to do. You have to become the person who can calibrate what's good and what's not good for you, what's healthy, what takes you towards your goals, and what doesn't, what it actually looks like to be bold and courageous, and what's actually coping in reality that you like to tell yourself that you're being bold and courageous. Then there's a whole area of social elegance training that you need, because if you are not dependent, then you need to have self-sustenance, you need to have a good career, you need to be successful, and you can't do any of that if you go out there and act like a white man. I've talked about this so many times. Because we're humans, we only achieve what we don't have any option but to achieve. If you give yourself an alternate plan B that's a little easier, that's a little more mitigated, and a version of you settling, then you will fall back on that. It's just human. We end up doing what's easier. So you have to put yourself in environments, and that's what I had to do a lot. Put myself in an environment where I am forced to grow. Again, asterisk, do it responsibly. To join the Your Babbage Era community, go down to the description below. If you're interested in Unleash Social Elegance Accelerator group coaching cohort, this is more professional training and boundaries, assertion, and power strategies, then also go down to the description below. Being the bad bitch is not cosplay. You have to do what it takes. I am not for everybody. For those of you who are ready, this is a sign that you've always been looking for. See you in our coaching programs.